Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's session. It looks like most of you have gone, or most of us have gone away for what in England we call a kip, an after-lunch kip. But never mind, we're going to have a good afternoon, so welcome, everybody. I've got 2 minutes, apparently, to talk about me, which is going to be very difficult because I love talking about myself. But to try and keep it brief, my name is Bob Perry. You might have gathered I'm not from America, I'm from England, and it is great to be here in America. I've got WM myself. I've had it 7 years, or probably a little bit longer, but I'm having a great life. I did the B&R option 7 years ago, and here I am. I'm having a great life. One thing that Dr. Ansell didn't mention this morning, which I think is very important, he talked about weight loss. What he didn't say is that coming to America, I've only been here a week, and I've rapid weight gain. But anyway, so I've got a part-time job. I work for a charity called WMUK. So it's the IWMF of the United Kingdom and Ireland, and I'm the patient support manager. So I'm so passionate about what we're going to be talking about everything in the WM, but in particular about this afternoon, because I get an opportunity to speak to so many people who have got WM, but more importantly, I get an opportunity to speak to their husband, wives, daughters, mothers, caregivers, all those kind of people. And it's tough for those people, sometimes tougher, especially as I found with, if it's a male person who's got WM, like me, that we bury our heads in the sand and we let our wives worry about asking all the questions and our medication and all that. And so I honestly believe that mental health and all those well-being and all those sort of things apply to the whole sort of group of people. So anyway, I am now officially a TV celebrity in America. Friday night, yeah, thank you, yeah. I will be doing autographs after this. They're $5, but if you hang around till tomorrow, they'll go up to $10. So you need to grab me today. Anyway, enough about me. This afternoon, it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Bires. Now, she's got a lot of fancy qualifications, but when I spoke to her just now, she said, I'm just a social worker. Well, she is a social worker, but she's not just a social worker. So Jennifer is the Executive Director of Life with Cancer and Patient Experience for the Inova Scar Cancer Institute. She works to ensure that patients, survivors, and their family members have access to psychosocial care at no cost to them to help individuals cope with cancer, its treatments, survivorship in the best possible way. Jennifer oversees the ISCI Arts and Healing Program, ensuring patients have access to the arts as a modality of healing and part of their treatment process. She was awarded the Oncology Social Worker of the Year Award in 2017 from the Association of Oncology Social Workers. She sits on the Leadership Council for AONN+, and is the past chair for the Board of Oncology Social Work. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Bires.
Thank you all for coming back after lunch. All right. I'm really excited that WM brought this talk to the conference, the IWMF brought this talk to the conference, because I think oftentimes we don't spend enough time talking about emotional well-being when there's been a cancer diagnosis. It's really easy to get caught up in the medications you need to take and the doctors you need to see, and that is super important, like really, really important, but also it's really important to take care of yourselves, either as a patient or a caregiver. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today will apply to both patients and caregivers, and so I'm hoping that everyone can take away one little nugget from today that they can incorporate into their lives and maybe make a positive difference. So cancer can mean a lot of things, but it often means learning to live with fear and uncertainty, and sometimes that means waiting for the other shoe to drop or being worried about what's around the corner. I also think that it can have a big impact on our beliefs, like the way we move through the world or how we view the world shifts very suddenly, sometimes overnight. Maybe before you thought, I'm a healthy individual, or you thought the world was really predictable and you could expect what would happen day to day. And after a diagnosis, some of those things become really unpredictable, and that's a tough space to sit in oftentimes. Let's see, how long have I been doing this? So when I came to cancer care in 2009, we oftentimes didn't assess patients for distress or depression and anxiety, some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And now it really is a standard of care of what we're doing. We anticipate that when people get a cancer diagnosis, that they're going to have distress. And in fact, we know that 30 to 40% of patients are going to have distress that needs someone, like a professional, to help them moderate it. And so if during your diagnosis at all, you've had feelings of distress, or as a caregiver you've had distress, please know this is a really normal reaction to a bummer of a diagnosis. You know, your reaction to it is normal. So thinking that you would get a diagnosis and it would be fine would be not necessarily normal. And I think it's important that we normalize this, because sometimes it's hard to ask for help if we don't think anyone else is managing a similar situation. And I realized I didn't start my time clock, so can someone pull me off the stage when I'm supposed to be done? Okay, I'm gonna count on someone to do that. And when we think about distress, you know, it's not just one aspect. It really is your psychological well-being, your social, spiritual, and physical well-being, so it really takes into account many, many parts of your whole person. And the other thing we know is that there's periods that are gonna be more stressful than not. And it's been really nice getting to listen into some of this conference, and I got to sit with the most amazing group of caregivers yesterday. And they talked about these key periods of stress. You know, some people were like, oh, we just found out about the diagnosis, that was a really stressful time, or we're in a great period of stability, so things feel really good right now. But what we can expect is that when there's shifts, things are gonna feel a little more stressful. So maybe before you were diagnosed and you were having lots of symptoms, that felt really stressful because you were like, what is going on in my body? And no one could give you an answer. Or the day you got the diagnosis and you were all of a sudden trying to do all the research and wondering, what does this mean for my next day, months, years? How am I gonna live with this? Who's gonna take care of me? What's this gonna feel like? Sometimes when there's shifts in the treatment that you're on, if you're shifting from one treatment to another, or even moving into a maintenance phase, anytime there's gonna be a change, that's a period of time where we may anticipate some distress. And I mention that not because necessarily you can stop the distress, but we all have ways that we respond to distress, and if we're paying attention to times when we're in higher distress, we can use some of the coping mechanisms that we're going to talk about later in the presentation to help manage those feelings. So what is this stress I've been talking about? The acute stress reaction is the sympathetic nervous system is activated, and that means we kind of get kicked into our fight or flight mechanism of our body. So imagine with me for a minute that you're driving in a car, and all of a sudden you see lights behind you, and Bob is pulling you over for doing something wrong. You don't know what it is. All of a sudden, your heart starts beating faster, maybe your palms start sweating, maybe your muscles are tightening up, you may feel something in your stomach or something happening, and your body is responding as if you're in a life or death situation. Now, for most people, getting pulled over is not a life or death situation, but your body thinks that it is. And so it takes all of your resources to do things that are going to keep you alive, which means it's not doing things like concentrating on your immune system or remaining in a calm state. And so we want to pay attention to this so that when our body gets hijacked in this way, that we can do things that will help us settle down more quickly. We can't necessarily stop it from happening. It's that automatic response, our body trying to keep us alive. But what we can do is help our body realize more quickly that there is not a tiger chasing us, and it's not necessarily a life or death situation in that exact moment. Like I mentioned, it really impacts all of your body, your brain, your hormones, your skin, your lungs, your heart, your GI, your muscles, your eyes. It has a huge impact on our physical well-being. And so learning to manage this response and react to it can be really important. Like up here right now, I feel a little stressed, so I imagine my system is kicked in a bit. And also chronic stress, really the body never getting to get back to that rest and digest state. And And we know that doctor's appointments or scans or blood tests can really kick us into this high stress state. And like I mentioned, you all may be feeling a little stressed since I just talked about so much stress. So we're going to practice one of our little skills. So if I could just invite folks for a minute, if you could place a hand on your belly or your heart or maybe both. And I just want you to slow down for a minute, and we're going to take 3 breaths together. Great. Anyone feel any different? A few nods. I feel calmer. Thank you for joining me in that. Okay. Anxiety is also important. So I talked about distress. Distress is that really normal reaction. Anxiety is also a normal reaction to a diagnosis or to having a family member diagnosed. It's common. It's normal. Sometimes it is adaptive and sometimes it's maladaptive. So sometimes anxiety can help us know what we need to do next, or it's our body signaling something feels uncomfortable. And then we can take an action or do something and it helps us feel better. But sometimes it's really chronic and it stays with us a lot, and that's when we're really worried about it. It could show up in a lot of obsessive thoughts, like what if I get sicker? How will this impact my quality of life? What if I can't take care of myself? But it also maybe ruminating thoughts or really just having difficulty making your day-to-day decisions. I like this. I don't know, earlier I couldn't read the cartoon, but it says, "Don't panic, I'm just a sore throat." So I know oftentimes when we're really paying close attention to our bodies, sometimes there's an ache or pain or a fatigue or some symptom that pops up that really makes us worry that things are worse than they were the day before. And so paying attention to those symptoms is important because it's what keeps you alive. It reminds you to go to the doctor. It reminds you to get things checked out. But sometimes things that are not related to our illness can pop up and cause a lot of anxiety. And so learning to differentiate between the two can be really helpful and important. So what are some things that help with managing anxiety? Relaxation techniques. The breathing exercise that we just did a minute ago is a great one. Our breath goes with us everywhere. If it's not with you, you're in trouble. So you have it with you. So you feel that anxiety creeping up, and the way you know anxiety is creeping up is because you're paying attention to your body, and maybe you'll do just a quick breathing exercise. And I have a few other examples later on in the presentation we can talk about. Medication can also be helpful. Sometimes people don't want to take more medication if you're on a lot of medications, but if you find that anxiety is really interfering with your well-being or your day-to-day, medication can be really helpful for that. As a social worker, I'm a big proponent of talk therapy. There's cognitive behavioral therapy approaches or just other approaches that help us kind of sort out all of that talking that's happening in our mind. So finding a therapist could be a really helpful resource. Exercise. I'm going to mention exercise probably 4 or 5 times today, and I really think that it can help in many different areas. Anxiety, depression, fatigue. There's literature behind all of these pieces, and so I have really loved seeing all the movement and stretch breaks, the walking. This idea of moving our body can be a really important key to our emotional well-being. And then what we eat is important. I heard someone offered 2 desserts after the last session. So that's good for here, that's good, but we want to be mindful of what we're putting into our bodies. And really this idea of being in the present moment. Oftentimes when we're feeling anxiety, it's because we're so busy thinking about the future or we're thinking about the past. And so a way to really manage anxiety is to be here in this present moment. And so I want us to do another breathing exercise, another little meditation or mindfulness together, because this can be a really nice practice to really help settle you and come into the present moment. So I'll invite folks to close or lower their eyes again if you feel comfortable with that. And I want you to get as comfortable as you can in your seat. So maybe you really feel the bottom of the chair supporting you or the back of the chair supporting your back. And perhaps you have 2 feet really firmly planted on the ground, and you can feel that ground supporting you. And what I'd like if for folks could focus on their breath for a minute. So just feeling that inhale and that exhale. And really coming into the breath, that inhale and that exhale. And as you're focusing on your breath, perhaps your shoulders will move a little bit away from your ears. Or notice if there's any tension in your face, like maybe your forehead scrunched up a little bit or your cheeks are holding some tension. See if you can loosen those muscles just a little more. And as you're listening to my voice, if you notice that your mind starts to wander, that's okay, no judgment. Just come back to that breath. Feeling that inhale and that exhale. Only focusing on the present moment, being here, feeling the chair supporting you, noticing that inhale and that exhale. Maybe even noticing how our bodies are relaxing even more as we settle into this moment. Very nice. As folks are ready, I invite you back into the room with us. Thank you all. I don't know if anyone felt it, but the room got really quiet and really calm, which sometimes when we're feeling very anxious, we need a moment of pause. We need to kind of change the environment that we're in. We've done 2 exercises now. One was just 3 quick breaths, and this was probably I don't even know if it was a 3-minute guided meditation. But it'd be interesting to note if your body feels any differently. And we're in a big room, so if your body doesn't feel any differently, don't say, it didn't work, I'm never going to do it again. But for those of you that did feel something different, notice the power of just that very quick break and how it can change maybe where you're at. Mindfulness and meditation can really help bring the body into physiological and psychological balance. It helps us relax. Oftentimes, if we're paying attention to our breath, it's harder to pay attention to our to-do list or that future or that past that we talked about. It can lower blood pressure, slow the heart rate, relaxes those big muscle groups, increases digestion. All of these lead to really good immune function. And so using this idea of mindfulness or meditation or the calming of the mind can really help with physical health as well as emotional and mental well-being. It also does things like help with thoughtful decision-making. So I don't know if folks remember when you got your diagnosis, but oftentimes you don't remember anything else that was said in that visit. And part of that is because you're entering into that fight or flight stage. So if you can bring your body back into regulation, it makes it easier to hear what's being said, to think thoughtfully about it, but also to connect with other people. And connecting with other people is a really important part of well-being. Okay. I want to talk about depression for a minute just because it's really important, and we know that people who get diagnosed with cancer have an increased risk of depression, and that people who've had depression in their life, that if they get a cancer diagnosis, it can likely exacerbate it. So not everyone's gonna raise to the level of depression. There's not near as high rates as distress. You know, distress is very common like we talked about, but it's also really important to know and notice if you're feeling depressed. And that impacts not only patients, but our caregivers too. So it's something that we really want to pay attention to. I think what's hard about depression is that the symptoms of depression often mimic the symptoms of a cancer diagnosis. So this idea of fatigue. It's hard to know if you're not enjoying your regular activities because you're so tired or because you're feeling depressed and you no longer get enjoyment out of them. And so it can take a little bit of nuancing to figure out if a symptom is coming from depression or coming from an illness. But we want to pay attention to that. Things like sleep changes, ongoing sadness and hopelessness, thoughts of death or suicide can be a really important indicator that someone needs to get help. So I just want to mention depression today as something that would be important to pay attention to. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. We don't always know exactly why one person gets depressed and another doesn't. Genes play into it, brain chemistry, stress and health hormones, even daylight and seasons. So I don't know if some people feel sadder during the winter if they live in a place that is cold and gray versus the summer where it's sunny and warm and you can be outside and moving. Life events, so like a diagnosis of cancer could really impact this. Family and social events, if you're not getting the support that you need, and again, reacting to life situations. So just important to pay attention to. And again, there's treatment for this. So just because you're feeling distressed, anxious, depressed, there is always something that you can do. And it may mean medication. It also, this idea of talk therapy, again, exercise, that's the second time I've mentioned it, maybe the third, and nutrition. So just really knowing that there is help. But I think sometimes when we got so caught up in figuring out what our next medical appointment is or drug we need to take, we may not really be paying attention to what's going on inside of us. And so taking time to notice that this would be a really normal reaction and asking for help can be important. All right. So how to keep walking forward and even find renewal along the way in this year. So this was about the first year of COVID, but I think has a lot of applications here of things blown apart. Because sometimes that's what a cancer diagnosis can do. It can really blow things apart in some way. And so we need to ask what sustains us, how to hold on to our sense of what is whole and true and undamaged, even in the face of loss. Because while a cancer diagnosis can have such a big impact on people's lives, there are still many, many other parts of yourself. And so that becomes one part of your whole person. And it may be an important part, but there's still lots of other things that make you up, that existed before the cancer and that will exist after the cancer. And so the thing we have to remember about a trauma like a diagnosis is that sometimes it can impact our ability to extend grace to ourselves. And sometimes it can be easy to be cynical or angry, ask questions like, why me? And those aren't bad questions, but we really want to get to back to this space of hope. And sometimes it can feel really brave and courageous to have hope. I don't think that's hard for this group because I've heard so many hopeful stories and messages here. But really to focus on those thoughts that are going on in your head and find the ones that can lead you to more of a hopeful space if you're having moments or days that are feeling less hopeful in nature. And sometimes that may mean that we need to redefine what gives us purpose or what brings meaning in life. But always that there's something to be hopeful for. And to know that wellness is possible. So wellness is a recognition that all that we think, say, feel, and do affects our greater health and well-being, body, mind, spirit, work, play, and love. And so it's not... This sounds like there's a million things that you have to do, and it's not that there's a million things that you have to do, but there's all these little pieces that may make a really big difference in your wellness and how you're feeling. And really just this idea that pain is inevitable. We know that in life that there is going to be pain, but how we respond to that pain really determines how much suffering we may have. So I want to spend the rest of our time today talking a little bit about resilience. And one definition of resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. One thing I love about that definition is this idea of flexibility. The more flexible we can be with how life is supposed to be or how things are supposed to work, oftentimes the better we'll feel. When we don't kind of get stuck in a way of it's supposed to be this way or it's supposed to be that way, that flexibility really allows us to kind of catch resilience. But one thing that I think is missing from this is an idea of growth. So oftentimes when we have a negative situation, where we find resilience is where we find growth and change. So when we take a situation and we make ourselves better, we change something about ourselves, that's where the resilience really lies, is to be able to take a difficult or painful situation and have growth from it. Because oftentimes that's the thing we can control. We can't control that the situation happened. That's outside of our control. But how we respond to it really is something that we have a little bit of control over. And the other thing we know is that there are some people out there who see the glass half full and other people who see it half empty. And research is really unclear about the way in which this perspective develops. So no one can say it's your fault if you're a half-glass empty person, or that you did something right if you're a half-glass full person. And one is not better than the other. I think it's important to know what type of person you are, what you lean towards, and maybe even good to know what your caregiver or the important people in your life lean towards, because it'll give you some insight of what your first reaction is going to be when you get news, and what their first reaction is going to be when they get news. And so for some of us, if we're half-glass empty people, our first reaction may be a negative one, and that's okay. You know, we may not change that first reaction, but what we really want to do is be paying attention to that. So when that reaction comes up, we can ask the question, is that true? Or is it false? Or is there somewhere in between? And by paying attention to our reactions or our thoughts as they come up, it allows us to really question them and not take them at face value. All right, so what are some of the characteristics of highly resilient people? They're calm, innovative, they think outside of the box. Much like the speed dating thing that was here, I thought that was such a creative way for survivors to get to meet one another. And so being able to be really creative and think outside of the box can be important. Being able to take decisive action. So not ruminating over a decision, making the decision and moving forward, and not constantly second guessing. Was that the right decision? The decision's been made, and so you make it and you move forward. Having a tenacity and interpersonal connectedness and support, this idea of self-integrity, self-discipline and control, and optimism and positive thinking. You don't need to have all of these characteristics to be a resilient person, but we know that these show up for resilient people. So what if you looked at that list and you're like, oh my gosh, I am none of those things. I'm not going to be resilient. That is not the message. There is a million decisions that we can make every day that can help us be more resilient. And here are some areas that you can nurture resilience, and we're going to talk about a few of these on the next slides. So one is this idea of rekindling meaning and purpose. And I've talked a little bit about meaning and purpose today, but not a lot. But one thing we know that helps create resilience is having a really clear sense of what brings us meaning. I think as I've heard a lot of the folks who are volunteering or working with the IWMF, that brings folks a lot of purpose. People who are support group leaders are connecting with other people in this area. I talked to a few people that brought them a lot of purpose. In the caregiver group the other day, it was really clear that for a lot of caregivers, it brought them so much purpose to be able to show up for the person that they were supporting. And so that can be a big piece of what brings you purpose. But sometimes when we get a diagnosis, maybe we have to quit working, or maybe we were an athlete and we can't do the things that we used to do, or our thinking isn't as clear, and so it becomes harder to read or do some of the activities that felt really important before. And so sometimes we have to dial it back and figure out what about those activities really gave us purpose and try to recalibrate or shift so that we can still have that purpose in our life, but maybe through a different activity or a way of being. So I've heard from some people, like walking down the street and being the person who smiles at people is what gives them purpose in life. And so it doesn't have to be this grand, like, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to make everyone's life better thing. It can be these really small things that make you know who you are and that feel important. I also like this question, like, what makes you forget to eat? Something that's so exciting that you don't get hungry. Or how you feel most connected to other people can help us know the things that bring meaning and purpose to our lives. So I'm going to skip the exercise we were going to do with this. I'm sure some people will be excited and some people will be sad, but we'll come back to it if we have time at the end. Another important piece is gratitude. If you read the news, you've probably seen articles coming out about gratitude and the importance of gratitude. There's tons and tons of studies. This is one study that I thought was really interesting. Participants were randomized to 3 groups, and each group was assigned to write weekly for 10 weeks, 5 things they were grateful for, or 5 things they were hassled for, or 5 events that affected them each week. So grateful, hassled, or just affected them. And what they found was that the group that was writing about things they were grateful for was happier, had fewer health complaints, increased their exercise, and had less physical illness. And so this idea of doing an exercise once a week could make such a big difference in like your overall well-being is really powerful. When we think about gratitude and writing down things we're grateful for, this is not something that takes hours. It's not like this huge lifestyle change. It's just a small moment on reflecting what's important. So I've had a lot of patients who've incorporated this into their life, and they either do it as a family at the dinner table. They may have a grateful journal at their bedside, so they'll write 3 things down when they wake up or 3 things down before they go to bed. But really being able to focus on the things we're grateful for makes us walk through the day looking for those things so that we can write them down. And so if we're a glass half empty person, we may have been walking around looking for things that disappointed us. But if we start looking for things that we can write in our gratitude journal, we're probably going to notice a lot of things that we could be really grateful for. And that very simple exercise can help change the way that you view the world and go through the world. Supportive touch is another really nice thing. We've done a little supportive touch earlier. I had you put your hand on your heart or your belly. But letting your body know that you care, or really being in tune with your body, sometimes it makes it easier for the mind to follow. So hands over heart is a really nice one. Hands on the belly is a good one. Just putting your hands like cradling your face, like this is really nice. Or even holding your own hand. If you pair any of those with your breath, like we practiced earlier, slowing down your breath, it can make a big difference in how your body's feeling. And that's a really simple thing that you can do wherever you're at. Anchors can also be helpful. Anchors could be affirmations about yourself. It could be a visual cue. So maybe you look to the sky, or maybe you have a certain spot in the doctor's office that you look if it's something that gets you anxious. It may be something that you touch. So if you have a rock that's important to you, you could keep it in your pocket and run your hand over it. Or maybe a piece of jewelry that's meaningful, like a necklace or a ring. Just simply touching it can remind yourself to kind of be present, be in the moment, and not be going into the future or into the past, which is where we know that we find a lot of that anxiety. So what's some examples of affirmation? Here are a few examples. For some people, these may speak to you. For some people, you're going to say, these do not speak to me at all. These are not helpful. I think it's really important to write your own affirmations. So what feels important to you? I trust in the flow of life. I'm balanced and peaceful. What would speak to you when you were feeling really anxious and help you calm down? It would be like, maybe I'm a connected person, or I have people who love me. Sometimes I recommend that people put their affirmations on a card in their wallet or in their pocket, so when they're feeling particularly anxious, they can pull it out and remind themselves. It can be helpful to say these affirmations out loud. If affirmations are particularly helpful, maybe you want to put them in the places in your house you go most, so on your refrigerator, and the mirror in the bathroom, maybe on the dash of your car. Just a place to really infuse some positivity in what's happening. And that doesn't mean that we don't focus on distressing things, but there needs to be a balance between distressing times in life and positive times in life. And so by infusing some of these positive things around our space can be really helpful in making sure we're incorporating both. All right, I wanted to talk just very briefly about non-productive thinking, because non-productive thinking can lead to more distressing thoughts. And so when we're feeling depressed or fearful or anxious, oftentimes we jump to conclusions or we misinterpret events. And so we may think something like, I'm not going to be alive next year at this time, or my doctor doesn't like me, or something that is maybe not true and maybe not helpful. And so really paying attention again to those thoughts can be really helpful. Sometimes when we're thinking about thoughts a lot, we pretend like we're problem solving, like, oh, I'm trying to fix this issue, so I'm thinking about it. But really, that's not always the case. Oftentimes, we've kind of told ourselves a story that may or may not be true, and so we want to be really mindful of those stories and what we're thinking about. And language is really important. So this idea of all or nothing language or being very black and white in our thoughts is not generally helpful. There is generally gray space. And so finding that gray, playing the devil's advocate can be really helpful. Making sure not to overgeneralize. Mind reading. I see this happen a lot with family members, like so-and-so doesn't care about me or this person isn't here to support me. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes people are not good supporters. But oftentimes they probably have something going on in their own life and they didn't even realize that they weren't showing up for you. And so making sure that we're asking the right questions, or if we don't feel comfortable asking the questions, we're just making room for a wide array of possibilities. Another important piece I wanted to mention is expectations. So when we think about expectations, that can be a really important piece of resilience as well. So you want to ask yourself, do you have realistic expectations? Because oftentimes unrealistic expectations can lead to more despair. When we think about expectations, we want to be mindful that no humans are perfect. And so when we make room for imperfections, oftentimes people won't let us down as much, or our expectations will be more realistic in nature. I talked earlier about flexibility, and I really like the word flexible, and I think being flexible is an important part of being resilient. And so making sure our expectations create room for multiple possibilities. And then also just being really mindful. There are some things that are very much within our control, and there are other things that are absolutely outside of our control. And if we can learn the difference between the two, then it's easier to set expectations, and maybe easier not quite to be as upset when the things we can't control don't go the way that we want them to. All right, also important, opportunities for self-discovery. So thinking about when was the last time that you did something for the first time? There's something really amazing about getting outside of your comfort zone and doing something for the first time. Oftentimes, if we're doing something new, it makes it nearly impossible to be thinking about the future or thinking about the past, because you're in the moment. You don't exactly know what you're doing. So doing new things outside of our comfort zone can be a really nice break for our brain, because we really have to be in the moment. Oftentimes, when we do new things, they don't always go as planned. So there's a lot of opportunity for laughter. There's a lot of opportunity to learn flexibility. So I think, I would encourage folks to find something new that you can do. Maybe even do it with your caregiver, something that would be outside of your comfort zone that would help you try something different and experience life in a different way. It can be a really helpful way to shake any feelings of despair that are coming up. The other really important piece is connections. So oftentimes, fearfulness is intensified by feeling alone. And feeling like nobody knows what we're going through. And I think that that's really common when you have a diagnosis like WM. There's so few people that have that diagnosis that oftentimes it may feel very lonely. And sometimes when we're feeling this way, we have a tendency to go inside instead of asking for help or reaching out for help. But being connected, asking people for help when you need it, can be such a key part of getting what you need. Social isolation is really a big contributor to depression, a big contributor to anxiety, and there's all kinds of research, especially after COVID, that's coming out about how social isolation is really bad for our physical health. Now, COVID has made it really difficult to connect because it's scary. Sometimes if we're immunocompromised, being in big groups doesn't feel safe. And so figuring out that balance between feeling safe and making sure you're still connecting is so important. I think for a lot of people here, you know that that's important. And a lot of people who are at home also know it's important because you are involved in things like IWMF and support groups and connecting with other people. But just a reminder that that connection is a really important piece of physical and emotional well-being. All right, so as a small part of a reflection, what I want to ask people to do or to think about is, one, what can you do to impact your environment? So is there anything that we talked about today that you could take home that would impact your environment? Or is there a tool or a practice that you're willing to commit to? So maybe that's finding a therapist, maybe it's getting out and walking more, maybe it's starting a gratitude journal. But these really small steps can tend to add up and can make big shifts in your overall well-being. And the other piece that is really important to this is finding an accountability partner. So oftentimes we'll say, yes, I'm going to exercise more, or yes, I'm going to eat better, or I promise I'm going to go to that support group, but not tonight because I'm really tired. And so figuring out what you're willing to try and maybe writing it down, because writing things down can be a really important first step in us taking the next step, but also finding that accountability partner. So turning to someone next to you or calling someone when you get home and say, this is what I've decided I'm going to do for my well-being. This will be my next first step towards my well-being. Don't pick 100 things. Like, don't even pick 5. Pick 1 and tell your accountability partner about it, and then see how you can start incorporating that into your life. And now we're going to open it up for questions.
First of all, spot on. Thank you very much. One of the things that I've also found helpful is allowing others to be exposed to your self-knowledge. Early in my career, I learned that I was a thinker. So if someone would come into my office and ask me a question and want an answer right away, it would put me into stress mode. And I think a lot of that happens when we see our doctors, because they don't know how or what triggers we have. What is the industry kind of doing to help us address that? Because it seems like, you either take it from your doctor the way he likes to deliver it, he or she likes to deliver it, or you move on to a different doctor. But it seems like they can adapt to and help us.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and that's such a nice point that sometimes the doctor is not the right fit, and you may have to find another doctor. But oftentimes, every patient is so different. And so doctors really, it takes a while for them to get to know you and know what's important to you, and you can help make that happen more quickly. So if you know you need more time to think about things, or you like to go in with a list of questions, or you want them to tell the information to a family member first before you hear about it. I mean, there's 100 different ways that people could want or like information. I think, unfortunately, or fortunately, there's a real opportunity for you to advocate for yourself. And most doctors are going to try to incorporate that. Not all of them. And that may be when you want to go try to find another doctor or think about who else could be supportive of you. But I think really being clear on what's helpful for you, like how it's helpful for you to receive information, how it's helpful for you to process things, are things your doctors want to know. They're often guessing, and we guess wrong because we talked a little bit about expectations and black and white thinking. So sharing that with your doctor can be important. And then when they get it right, make sure you say, hey, that's exactly how I wanted to get information. Thank you. Or when they miss the mark a little bit, say, I know you're trying, but it would have been more helpful had you done it this way. Because oftentimes you're having years and years long relationship with these people. And so taking the time to work out those kinks and learn to work together can be really important. Thank you for bringing that up.
I don't know if this is really a question, but sort of an interesting phenomena of this diagnosis is when you share with other people what you have, they want you to look sick. It's like, how can you have cancer? You look so well.
Yeah, their expectations are, I don't know, from the movies or from who knows where. And also it's like, why are you disappointed that I don't look sick? I think, there's a lot of that. One, I think that's why conferences like this are so important. How wonderful to be in a room full of people who get it and know what's happening. And making sure you're making those connections often can be so incredibly important. And oftentimes we have to educate our friends and our family members. And that's hard to do when you're not feeling well or you're tired. So sometimes if you have a friend or a family member who really gets it, let them be the voice. Let them talk to your other group of people to say, what is most helpful to you at this time? And to remind them that if they say, you don't look sick, that's not super helpful and doesn't make you feel really good. Using friends or family members to kind of help make those connections if you're too tired, or doing it yourself is fine. But I think no one really knows. And so the more you can verbalize and help people understand where you're coming from, the more supported you will feel. And making sure that you have people like in this room or at home can also be a really important piece of that well-being as well.
Today is Earth Day. Doing little things like taking care of some trash. I like to garden, and I like to be able to do something and watch it grow. Thank you.
Awesome. I hear that you find purpose and meaning in taking care of the earth. And these little pieces like picking up trash are not so little. Like, how significant. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think for everyone to be able to speak so clearly about what's important to them can be really helpful.
I want to say something that was very valuable to me like 30 years ago when I first started out. I had a friend who was very heavily into mind-body connection. And when she found out what I was going through, she said, come over to my house, this evening. And she did some of the training as far as like, being able to relax and being able to do some of the things that we just did here today. And I did end up using that during my, my bone marrow aspiration, which was really stressing out my oncologist. I mean, he had pit stains to the waist because my bones were really hard and he was really like struggling. But I was focusing on other things. I mean, I was in another place. So, he thought he was really like killing me, but I was in a better place than he was.
I love that story. Thank you. Yeah. Our mind is so powerful. And so when we really can harness it, or we can learn to pay attention to what's happening in our body and in our mind and how they're working together, you can do something like that. That's really great. Thank you for that example.
Hi, Jennifer. I have a question from our virtual audience, and thank you for everyone that's participating virtually today. Someone is asking, what about the stages of grief following diagnosis?
So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created the stages of grief, and it's written about in a really linear process. And so for anyone who doesn't know about the stages of grief, I'm not going to say them all right now because I would forget one, but it's worth looking up. I think what's important to know about the stages of grief is that it's not linear. And so we go in and out of these stages of sadness, of bargaining, of acceptance, and they will come and go in different stages of a diagnosis. And so there may be grief at the beginning due to some things that are lost or have changed, or even how we view ourselves in the world. And that grief will shift and morph as things go on. It won't ever completely go away, but it's really nonlinear in process. And I think it's important to know that, because we may get to a place of acceptance and be like, oh, finally. And then all of a sudden we're bargaining again. And so knowing that you're going to go in and out of those things, and you're going to have good days and bad days, and that's really normal, totally normal, I think can be really helpful to know.
Hi, I'm not sure if it's a question or more of an observation. Thank you for your presentation and focusing on the resiliency and these practical tools of where we can develop more resiliency. And you alluded to it, but you didn't say, but it's something I read about was post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And I feel for me, I really experienced that as getting the diagnosis, having treatment, and then I sort of just wanted to do away with everything WM related and, live my life. But I found myself circling back to the Facebook group, and then I could tell other people my experience, or I was diagnosed young as well, so other people aren't alone. And then also being the facilitator for the support group also helps give that meaning and that purpose, and it's like that giving back. And so I also would just like to thank everybody who's attending this that is also in a place of, they're not a newbie diagnosed, they're further along, but they're still coming back around to help everybody else, because it's so helpful.
Thank you for that comment. So important to know that you'll go through these stages, and how beautiful that you found the ability to give back, and that thought that it wasn't right for you at one point and honored that and then came back to it. Wonderful.
Hey, Jennifer. I have another virtual attendee question. And before I ask it, I just do want to share for those in this room and those virtually just to know that we do have yoga classes available and wellness classes. Ann Grace, who's here with us on site, has been doing that throughout the weekend. And we do have other classes. So you can always email me at office@IWMF.com to get on those class lists. But the question, Jennifer, from our virtual attendee, is yoga beneficial?
Yes. I don't have all the science up here, and I'm probably not the best person to answer this, but yoga is beneficial for a million reasons. We've talked about breath. Yoga is a huge component. Breath is a huge component of yoga. Oftentimes when people think about yoga, they think about asana, or like doing postures and poses. And that movement is important, but there's a whole belief system that goes along with yoga of doing no harm in the world and of acceptance and different tenets. So yoga can be really powerful for a lot of people. And for some people, it doesn't work as well, but I always say like they didn't try it long enough. I think yoga can be a really amazing piece of taking care of yourself, your physical and your emotional self.
Hi, me again. For anyone who knows me really well, they usually don't ask me how are you doing, because my usual response is, I've never had a bad day in my life. And people say, oh, you're so positive. And I say, I really do it for me, because every time I say it, it reminds me to not have a bad day or to treat it like a bad day. So I found that if you find something that triggers you and you say it enough, you start to act it. So I just wanted to share that.
Glass half full over here. Amazing. I love it. So for our half empty folks, that's a great suggestion of like how sometimes we fake it until we make it. And that doesn't mean you can't have a bad day. Like, please have bad days. Bad moments are important, bad days are important. Talk to those moments with people, find help for them. Like, the idea of this presentation isn't that everything's rosy and you should always be happy. It's just that, like, we want moments of happiness in between our moments of sadness. And so finding that balance can be really important. And I love this, like, I'm going to say I'm having a good day or I've not had a bad day, because it really reminds myself, like, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be in the moment, and I'm going to enjoy this. I like that.
I have had bad days in my life, and so I just had to say that after Jan said this.
Balance, I like it.
But I really appreciated how you went through this today. You said a lot of the things that Ann Grace has said with the yoga in these sessions, and also what my therapist and I have gone through. I've gone through bouts of depression, not from WM, from some other things. And I would give a message to the people who are listening virtually that they should have come to hear. When I was on virtual, I learned a lot. There were a lot of good scientific points, a lot of good how to live with WM, those kind of things, but it was very much academic. Being here makes a real difference. Being with people who give you a pat on the shoulder when they pass you by, who recognize you. This is my first one where I've come to in real life. People have been very kind, both the people who run this, the people who are here. It's been a wonderful group to be with. I would encourage anybody to come to this, because it's a very encouraging, very life-lifting, and very good kind of place to be. So,
what a
thank
beautiful
you.
message. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all.